There are moments in life that define you, moments that strip away all the pretense, all the politeness, all the social niceties we wrap ourselves in, and reveal exactly who we are at our core. This is the story of one of those moments. This is the story of how I discovered that the person I welcomed into my family, the woman who married my only son, the mother of my only grandchild, was not who I thought she was. And this is the story of how I fought back when she tried to take everything from me. But I'm getting ahead of myself, aren't I? Let me start at the beginning, because every story worth telling deserves a proper beginning, and this one starts long before the betrayal, long before the threats, long before everything fell apart. Hi, my name is Vivian Catherine Ashford. My mother named me Vivian because she said it meant alive, and she wanted me to live fully, to embrace every moment, to never settle for less than I deserved. She had no idea how prophetic that name would become. How many times in my 89 years I would have to fight to truly live, to claim my space in a world that didn't always want to make room for women like me. 89 years old. Can you even imagine? 89 trips around the sun, 89 winters and springs and summers and falls, 89 years of joy and heartbreak, triumph and failure, love and loss. Some days I look in the mirror and I'm shocked by the woman staring back at me. White hair where there used to be chestnut brown, lines etched deep around my eyes and mouth. Each one a story, a memory, a moment lived. Hands that are still steady but marked with age spots and prominent veins. But you know what? I earned every single one of those lines, those spots, those marks of time, and I wouldn't trade them for anything. I live in Montecito, California, in a house that real estate agents love to call a mansion, an $8 million mansion. To be precise, though honestly, the monetary value is the least interesting thing about it. It sits on 5 acres of some of the most beautiful land you've ever laid eyes on. On clear mornings, which is most mornings here, I can stand on my balcony and watch the sun rise over the mountains behind me, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold, while in front of me, the Pacific Ocean stretches out to infinity, its waves catching that same golden light. The house itself is Mediterranean style, something my husband Jonathan and I fell in love with during a trip to the Spanish coast in 1980. We came home determined to build our dream house, and that's exactly what we did. Terracotta roof tiles imported from a family workshop in Andalusia, walls painted in warm cream with accents of deep terracotta and ocean blue, arched doorways and windows that let in floods of California sunshine, hand-painted Talavera tiles in the kitchen and bathrooms, each one a little work of art. Wrought iron railings on the balconies, twisted into patterns of vines and flowers by a craftsman in San Miguel de Allende. 12 bedrooms. I know, it sounds excessive, doesn't it? But Jonathan and I had hoped for a big family, for children and grandchildren filling those rooms with noise and laughter. Life had other plans, but we built the house anyway, filled it with guests and friends, and eventually, with just the two of us and our memories. 14 bathrooms, because Jonathan insisted that no guest should ever have to share a bathroom. A chef's kitchen with professional-grade appliances, marble countertops, and a farmhouse sink deep enough to bathe a toddler in. A library with floor-to-ceiling bookshelves on 3 walls, filled with first editions and medical journals and novels collected over a lifetime. A wine cellar that Jonathan lovingly curated, traveling to Napa and Bordeaux and Tuscany to select bottles that we'd open on special occasions, or sometimes just on Tuesday nights because we felt like it. The gardens are my pride and joy. 5 acres of carefully planned landscapes, rose gardens with over 100 varieties, from delicate David Austin English roses to hardy knockout roses that bloom from spring through fall. A vegetable garden where I still grow tomatoes and peppers and herbs. An olive grove with 20 trees that produce enough olives for us to press our own oil. A meditation garden with a koi pond and a Japanese maple that turns the most brilliant red in autumn. Walking paths lined with lavender and rosemary that release their scent when you brush against them. And my magnolia tree, the crown jewel, planted the year we moved in. It's over 40 years old now, massive and glorious. And when it blooms in early spring, the entire property smells like heaven. But you're not here to hear about my house, are you? You're here for the story. The story of betrayal and family and standing up for yourself when everyone expects you to just roll over and accept whatever they decide is best for you. So let me tell you about how I got here, to this house, to this life, to this moment where I'm sitting with you sharing this tale. I wasn't born into money. Far from it. I grew up in Hartford, Connecticut, in a modest 3-bedroom house with parents who worked hard for everything they had. My father was an insurance adjuster. My mother was a secretary at a law firm. We weren't poor, but we weren't comfortable either. Every penny was accounted for, every purchase carefully considered. I wore hand-me-downs from my older cousins. We took vacations to the lake 2 towns over, not to exotic destinations. Christmas meant one nice gift and a few practical items, like socks and school supplies. But my parents valued education above everything else. They scrimped and saved to send me to a good private school, where I discovered that I had a mind for science, particularly biology and chemistry. My teachers encouraged me, told me I could be a nurse, maybe even a teacher if I worked really hard. But I didn't want to be a nurse or a teacher. I wanted to be a doctor. You have to understand what that meant in 1952, when I graduated from high school. Women didn't become doctors. Oh, there were a handful. Sure, but they were oddities. Exceptions. Women who had to be twice as smart and work 3 times as hard as any man, just to get a chance. Medical schools had strict quotas limiting female admissions. Some schools didn't accept women at all. The prevailing wisdom was that women would just get married and quit, that we were taking spots away from men who would actually use their degrees, that we were too emotional, too weak, too distracted by our biology to handle the rigors of medical training. My guidance counselor, a woman herself, told me I was being unrealistic. My father's friends told him he was wasting his money educating a daughter who would just end up barefoot and pregnant anyway. Even my mother, who I thought would support me, suggested that maybe I should consider nursing, that it was more appropriate for a young lady. But I was stubborn. God, was I stubborn. I applied to 15 medical schools. I was rejected by 14. Columbia College of Physicians and Surgeons was the only one that took a chance on me. And even then, I found out years later that I was admitted because one of the male candidates they'd accepted died in a car accident 2 weeks before classes started, and they needed to fill the spot. I started medical school in September 1956, one of only 6 women in a class of 120. Those first few weeks were brutal. The male students resented us, made that clear in 1,000 small ways. They wouldn't partner with us in labs. They talked over us in discussions. They spread rumors about how we'd slept with the admissions committee to get in, how we were only there to find husbands, how we'd crack under the pressure by Christmas. The professors weren't much better. One anatomy professor refused to call on the female students, said our voices were too shrill and distracted him. Another told us outright that he thought we were wasting everyone's time, and that he'd be happy when we all dropped out. During a lecture on reproductive health, a surgery professor made a joke about how the women in the room would understand the material better once we'd fulfilled our biological destinies and had babies. The male students laughed. We sat there, faces burning, silent because we knew that any protest would just confirm their beliefs, that we were too sensitive for medicine. But I survived. More than survived, I thrived. I studied harder than I'd ever studied in my life. I memorized every bone, every muscle, every nerve pathway. I aced my exams. I showed up early to every rotation and stayed late. I volunteered for the worst shifts, the most challenging cases. I made myself indispensable, undeniable, impossible to ignore. By my 3rd year, even the professors who doubted me had to admit I knew my stuff. I graduated 2nd in my class in 1960, beaten only by a brilliant guy named Robert Chen, who went on to become a renowned neurosurgeon. At graduation, the anatomy professor who'd refused to call on me shook my hand and told me I'd proven him wrong. I smiled and thanked him, but inside I was thinking, I didn't prove anything to you. I proved it to myself. I did my residency at Massachusetts General Hospital in Boston, one of the most prestigious teaching hospitals in the world. I specialized in cardiology, and within that, I narrowed my focus even further to pediatric cardiology. My colleagues thought I was crazy. Pediatric cardiology was a relatively new field, underfunded, understaffed, dealing with cases that were often heartbreaking. Why not choose something more lucrative, more established, more prestigious? But I'd seen too many children die from heart conditions that could have been treated with better techniques, better technology, better trained specialists. I'd watched parents hold their babies as those tiny hearts gave out, watched them crumple with grief that no parent should ever have to endure. And I thought, I can help. I can make a difference. I can save some of these children. So I threw myself into pediatric cardiology with everything I had. I worked 100-hour weeks. I read every journal article, attended every conference, sought out mentors who were pioneers in the field. I learned to perform catheterizations on hearts the size of walnuts. I developed techniques for repairing congenital defects using minimally invasive procedures instead of the massive, open heart surgeries that were standard at the time. I published papers. I gave lectures. I trained other doctors. And somewhere along the way, in 1961, I met Jonathan. It was at a hospital fundraiser, one of those stuffy formal affairs where doctors in tuxedos and their wives in evening gowns gathered to drink champagne and write checks for new equipment. I almost didn't go. I was exhausted from a 36-hour shift, and I had a paper deadline looming, but my attending physician insisted, said it was important for the younger doctors to show their faces, to schmooze with the donors, so I went, wearing a dress. I'd borrowed from a friend because I couldn't afford to buy one nice enough for the occasion. I was standing by the hors d'oeuvres table, trying to look engaged while planning my escape when a man approached me. "You look about as excited to be here as I am," he said, and I looked up into the kindest brown eyes I'd ever seen. Jonathan was 31, a patent attorney at a prestigious firm, attending the fundraiser because his boss was on the hospital board. He was tall, with dark hair just starting to gray at the temples, an easy smile, and a self-deprecating sense of humor that immediately put me at ease. We talked for 3 hours straight, standing in that corner of the ballroom, ignoring everyone else. He asked about my work with genuine interest, listening intently as I explained congenital heart defects and surgical techniques. He didn't talk down to me or seem threatened by my career. He asked intelligent questions and seemed genuinely fascinated by what I did. When the event ended, he asked if he could take me to dinner the following week. I said yes without hesitation, which was completely unlike me. I didn't date much. I didn't have time, and frankly, most men were intimidated by my career or wanted me to give it up to be a proper housewife. But Jonathan was different. From that first dinner, I knew he was different. We dated for 6 months before he proposed, and in that time, he never once asked me to choose between him and my career. He came to my lectures. He read my papers, even though the medical terminology was way over his head. He brought me dinner at the hospital when I worked late. He celebrated my successes and supported me through my failures. When I got my first major paper published in the Journal of the American College of Cardiology, he bought champagne and insisted we celebrate. Even though it was a Tuesday night and we both had work the next day, he proposed on a Sunday morning in his apartment. No fancy restaurant, no elaborate plan. We were having coffee and reading the newspaper, and he just set down his section, looked at me across the table, and said, "Vivian, I love you. I love your brilliant mind and your fierce determination and your compassionate heart. I love that you're changing the world, saving children, doing work that matters. I want to spend the rest of my life supporting you, loving you, building a life together where you can be everything you're meant to be. Will you marry me?" I didn't even hesitate. Yes. We got married in a small ceremony in October 1961. Just family and close friends. No big wedding, no fuss. Just a simple exchange of vows in a chapel near his parents' home in Connecticut, followed by dinner at a nice restaurant. My mother cried through the whole ceremony. My father shook Jonathan's hand and told him to take good care of his daughter. Jonathan promised he would, and he kept that promise for 49 years. Our marriage wasn't always easy. We had the same struggles as any couple. Money was tight in the early years, with my residence salary and his junior attorney income barely covering our small apartment in a decent neighborhood. We argued about stupid things, like whose turn it was to do the dishes, and whether to vacation at the beach or the mountains. We navigated the challenges of 2 demanding careers, late nights, missed dinners, work stress bleeding into our personal life. But the hardest part, the part that nearly broke us, was trying to have children. We started trying right away. I was 26 when we got married. Jonathan was 32, and we figured we had plenty of time. But months passed with no pregnancy. Then a year, then 2. We saw specialists, underwent tests, tried everything the doctors suggested. Nothing worked. In 1963, I got pregnant for the first time. We were ecstatic, overjoyed, already picking out names and planning the nursery. I was 12 weeks along when I started bleeding. By the time I got to the hospital, it was over. The baby was gone. I was a doctor. I knew intellectually that first trimester miscarriages were common, that it didn't mean anything was wrong, that we could try again. But intellectually knowing something and emotionally accepting it are two very different things. I was devastated. We tried again. I got pregnant in 1964. This time, I made it to 14 weeks before the cramping started, before the bleeding began, before we lost another baby. Then again in early 1965. Another pregnancy, another loss. This time at 10 weeks, 3 miscarriages in 3 years. The grief was overwhelming. Every pregnancy announcement from friends felt like a knife to the heart. Every baby I treated in my practice was a reminder of what I couldn't have. Jonathan and I talked about adoption, about fostering, about accepting that maybe we weren't meant to be parents. But I wanted a biological child so badly. I wanted to feel a baby grow inside me, to give birth, to see a tiny person who was half me and half Jonathan. The doctors told me to take a break, to stop trying so hard, to let nature take its course. So we did. We focused on our careers, on our marriage, on building a good life together, even if it didn't include children. Jonathan made partner at his firm. I became the youngest attending physician in the cardiology department at Mass General. We bought our first house, a charming colonial in Brookline. We traveled to Europe, to Mexico, to California. We tried to be content with what we had instead of mourning what we didn't. And then, in November 1965, I realized I was late. I didn't tell Jonathan. I couldn't bear to get his hopes up, only to have them crushed again. I waited, barely breathing, terrified to hope. 1 week late, then 2. Then I couldn't stand it anymore and took a pregnancy test. Positive. I made it to 6 weeks, then 8, then 10. Every day that passed without bleeding was a victory, a miracle. At 12 weeks, the point where I'd lost the first baby, I finally told Jonathan. He cried. I'd never seen him cry before, and I've only seen him cry a handful of times since. We held each other on our bathroom floor and cried together, terrified and hopeful in equal measure. 14 weeks, 16 weeks, 20 weeks, the halfway point. I felt the baby move for the first time, a flutter like butterfly wings inside me, and I pressed my hands to my belly and whispered, "Please stay. Please be okay, please." The pregnancy wasn't easy. I had severe morning sickness that lasted all day for the first 4 months. I developed gestational diabetes and had to monitor my blood sugar constantly. My blood pressure ran high and I was put on bed rest for the last 6 weeks. But none of it mattered. Every discomfort, every complication was worth it as long as the baby stayed safe. Marcus Jonathan Ashford was born on June 15th, 1966 at 7:23 in the morning. 7 pounds, 9 ounces, 21 inches long. A shock of dark hair and his father's brown eyes. Perfect. Absolutely perfect. I held him for the first time and felt something shift fundamentally inside me. This tiny person, this miracle, was ours. After years of heartbreak and loss, we finally had our baby. I wish I could say I was one of those mothers who took to it naturally, who found it easy and instinctive. But the truth is I struggled. I was exhausted all the time. Breastfeeding was painful and difficult. Marcus cried for hours every evening with colic, and nothing I did seemed to help. I was used to fixing problems, to knowing what to do, but with this tiny baby, I felt helpless and inadequate. And I was torn. I'd worked so hard for my career, sacrificed so much. I was doing important work, saving children's lives. But I also wanted to be with Marcus, to not miss a single moment of his infancy. I tried to do both, going back to work part-time when Marcus was 3 months old, bringing him to the hospital daycare, rushing to feed him between patients. It was exhausting and guilt-inducing, and I felt like I was failing at everything. Jonathan was amazing. He took paternity leave, something almost unheard of. In 1966, he learned to change diapers and give bottles and soothe Marcus to sleep. He took night shifts so I could sleep. He never once made me feel like I had to choose between my career and our child. When I'd come home from a shift feeling guilty about being away, he'd remind me that I was saving other people's children, that our son would grow up proud of his mother's work. That love wasn't measured in hours spent together, but in the quality of the time we did have. We made it work. We hired a wonderful nanny named Maria who became like family. We adjusted our work schedules so one of us was always home in the evenings. We brought Marcus to hospital events and medical conferences, made him part of our professional lives. We read to him every night, taught him to ride a bike, attended every school play and parent-teacher conference. We poured everything we had into raising this miracle child. Marcus was a good kid, smart, curious, kind-hearted. He loved science like I did, and for a while, I thought he might follow me into medicine. But as he got older, he became more interested in business and finance. He was fascinated by how markets worked, how investments grew, how companies were valued. Jonathan and I supported him, even though privately I'd hoped he'd carry on the family tradition of medicine. He went to Choate Rosemary Hall for high school, then Yale for undergrad, then Harvard Business School. He graduated at the top of his class, had job offers from every major investment bank, and chose Goldman Sachs in New York. He was successful, driven, made his first million before he was 30. We were incredibly proud, but we worried about him too. He worked too hard, slept too little, didn't seem to have much of a personal life. When he did date, the women seemed more interested in his money and status than in him as a person. We'd meet them when he brought them home for holidays, polished, professional women who talked about their careers and their goals and seemed to view Marcus as a stepping stone to something else. And then, when Marcus was 45, he met Victoria. He called me on a Sunday in June 2019, more excited than I'd heard him in years. "Mom, I met someone special. I really think this could be it." "Tell me about her," I said, genuinely happy for him. My son deserved love, deserved someone who would see him for who he was. "Her name is Victoria Simmons. She's 32, works as a junior analyst at my firm. She's brilliant, Mom, graduated from Northwestern, speaks 3 languages, has incredible insights into emerging markets. And she's beautiful and funny, and I think I'm in love." 32, 13 years younger than Marcus. My first instinct was concern. Was she looking for a sugar daddy? A ticket to career advancement? But I pushed those thoughts aside. Age was just a number, and Marcus was happy. That's what mattered. "I can't wait to meet her," I said. "When can you bring her to visit?" They came for Christmas, 2019. Victoria was stunning, tall and slender with perfectly styled blonde hair, designer clothes that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent, and the kind of polished beauty that comes from expensive salons and dermatologists. She arrived with an enormous bouquet of flowers for me and a bottle of rare scotch for Jonathan. Both clearly expensive, both perfectly chosen. "Mrs. Ashford," she said, hugging me like we were old friends. "Marcus has told me so much about you. I'm so honored to finally meet you. And this house, it's absolutely spectacular." Marcus didn't exaggerate when he said it was the most beautiful home in California. She charmed us completely over that visit. She asked intelligent questions about my career, seemed genuinely interested in the challenges of being a woman in medicine in the 1960s. She laughed at Jonathan's dad jokes. She cooed appropriately over the photo albums I brought out. She fit right in at Christmas dinner, complimenting my cooking, offering to help clean up, making conversation with our friends who joined us. Jonathan pulled me aside on Christmas night after Victoria and Marcus had gone to bed. "I like her," he said. "She seems genuine, and more importantly, Marcus is happy. When's the last time we saw him this relaxed, this joyful?" I agreed. Victoria seemed wonderful. If I had any lingering doubts, I told myself I was being an overprotective mother, seeing problems where there weren't any. They got engaged in June 2020, right as the pandemic was shutting down the world. Marcus called me over the moon with happiness. She said, "Yes, Mom, we're getting married." They'd planned a big wedding for October 2020 in our gardens, but COVID changed those plans. It ended up being a small, intimate ceremony with just 40 people, everyone masked, socially distanced, following all the protocols. But it was still beautiful. The weather was perfect, clear and warm with a gentle breeze off the ocean. I'd worked with a florist to create stunning arrangements with roses from my garden, dahlias in deep burgundy and cream, eucalyptus and olive branches. Victoria wore a stunning Vera Wang gown, simple and elegant. Marcus looked so handsome in his tuxedo, so happy. I should have paid more attention that day. To the way Victoria positioned herself in every photo, always center stage. To how she'd interrupt Marcus when he was talking to redirect the conversation to herself. To the way she kept checking her phone during the ceremony, like she was documenting it for social media rather than actually being present. To how she pulled me aside before the reception and asked, casually, "So Vivian, what's the property actually worth?" "I've been curious." "Marcus won't tell me exact numbers." "That's between Jonathan and me," I'd said, uncomfortable with the question. "Oh, of course," she'd laughed. "I'm just so impressed by what you've built. I hope Marcus and I can create something half as beautiful someday." I'd smiled and changed the subject, but the question nagged at me. Why did she want to know? Why did it matter? Jonathan died 8 months later, June 2021, pancreatic cancer. We'd only known for 3 months before he was gone. 3 months from diagnosis to death. From "we found something concerning on your scan" to "I'm so sorry, there's nothing more we can do." Those 3 months were the worst of my life. Watching the man I'd loved for almost 60 years waste away, lose his strength, lose his dignity, lose himself. He was in pain despite the medication. He couldn't eat. He couldn't sleep. He lay in our bed, in the room where we'd spent 49 years of marriage, and slowly slipped away from me. Marcus came as often as he could, flying out from New York every weekend. Victoria came too, and I was grateful for that. She seemed genuinely sad, brought flowers, sat with Jonathan when I needed to rest. She held my hand during the funeral planning, helped me choose readings and music, seemed to genuinely care. After the funeral, after all the guests had left and the house was quiet again, Marcus asked if he and Victoria could stay for a few more days. Of course I said yes. I was dreading being alone in this big house, and I welcomed the company. It was 2 days after the funeral when Marcus sat me down in the library for a serious conversation. Victoria was there too, sitting close to him on the leather sofa. "Mom," Marcus started, his voice gentle, "we're worried about you. This house is enormous and you're here all alone now. Don't you think it might be time to consider downsizing? Maybe something smaller, more manageable? You're 75 years old. That's a lot of stairs, a lot of space for one person. What if something happened to you and no one knew?" I felt like I'd been slapped. My husband had been dead for less than a week, and my son was already trying to get me to leave my home? "I'm fine here," I said firmly. "This is my home. Your father and I built it together. Every room holds memories. I'm not leaving." "But Mom, be reasonable," Marcus started. "I am being reasonable," I interrupted. "I have a housekeeper 3 times a week, a gardener, a pool service. I'm healthy and active. There's no reason for me to leave." Victoria squeezed Marcus's hand, and I saw something flash in her eyes. "Of course, Vivian. We just want you to be safe. But you're right, there's no rush. We can revisit this later." But they didn't wait. Over the next year, every phone call from Marcus included gentle pressure about the house. Wasn't I lonely? Wasn't it too much work? Wouldn't I be happier in a retirement community with people my age? Activities, medical care on site? And always, always, Victoria was there in the background, her voice chiming in with concerned questions about my health, my safety, my future. I started to feel like prey being circled by predators. They were wearing me down bit by bit, trying to get me to agree to something I had no intention of doing. My home was my home, and I wasn't leaving it. Then came February 2023. Marcus called and said they wanted to visit for a long weekend. I said yes, always said yes, because they were my family. I prepared their favorite meals, got tickets to shows they'd enjoy, made sure everything was perfect for their visit. The first night was lovely. Dinner, wine, conversation, laughter. I thought maybe I'd been paranoid. Maybe they'd dropped the pressure campaign about the house. I was wrong. Saturday evening, we were having cocktails in the library before dinner. I'd made martinis, Jonathan's favorite, using his recipe. Marcus was browsing the bookshelves when Victoria spoke up. "Vivian, we need to talk about your future." The way she said it, so direct, so cold, sent chills down my spine. "My future is fine," I said carefully. "Is it?" she challenged. "You're not getting younger. This house is far too much for you. You need to be practical. You need to sell now while the market is good. This property could fetch $8 million, maybe more with the right realtor. You could buy a nice condo in a retirement community for a fraction of that and have plenty left over." "Victoria," Marcus started, but she cut him off. "No, Marcus, someone needs to be direct with her. She's being stubborn and unrealistic. Besides," she turned back to me, her eyes hard, "when you die. This all goes to Marcus anyway. Wouldn't it be better to simplify things now? Avoid the mess of probate and estate sales? You could liquidate now while you can still make decisions for yourself." The implication was clear before I became too senile to decide, before they had to decide for me. "I think you both need to leave," I said quietly. "Now." "Mom, please." Marcus looked devastated. "No, your wife has made her intentions very clear. She wants my house. She wants my money. She wants me out of the way. And I want both of you out of my house tonight." They left. Marcus called the next day apologizing, but the damage was done. I knew now what Victoria was really after. She'd never cared about me, never cared about family. She cared about my assets, about what she stood to gain. The months after that visit were tense. I barely heard from Marcus unless I called first. When I did reach him, Victoria was always there, always listening, always controlling the conversation. I felt like I was losing my son to this woman who only saw dollar signs when she looked at our family. Then came April 2024. Marcus called with news. Victoria was pregnant, a girl, due in December. My first grandchild. I should have been overjoyed. But all I could think was, now she's locked in. Now she has a permanent claim on my family, on my son, on whatever inheritance might come. But I tried. I bought baby clothes, set up a nursery in one of the guest rooms, started a college fund. I called every week to check on the pregnancy. I wanted to be a good grandmother, even if I had doubts about the mother. Baby Charlotte was born December 15th, 2024. I flew to New York the next day. She was perfect. 7 pounds, 4 ounces, with a head full of dark hair like Marcus had as a baby. I held her in the hospital and cried, missing Jonathan so much it physically hurt. He would have loved her so much. I stayed for 2 weeks, helping out, taking night shifts, doing laundry, cooking meals. I thought maybe this would bring us together, that becoming a grandmother would heal the rift. I was so wrong. In January, Marcus called. They wanted to stay with me for a month. Victoria was struggling with postpartum depression. They thought California would help. Of course I said yes. They arrived January 15th, 25. Victoria looked terrible, exhausted, unwashed, still in maternity clothes. I felt genuine sympathy. Motherhood is hard. I remembered those early days with Marcus. The first week was actually nice. I helped with Charlotte, set up the beautiful nursery I'd prepared, let Victoria rest and recover. She seemed grateful, started looking more like herself. But then things changed. Victoria started criticizing my home. These drapes are so heavy. This furniture is dated. The kitchen needs updating. Small comments at first, then bigger ones. Then she started rearranging things. I'd come downstairs to find furniture moved, photographs relocated. My carefully arranged home changed without my permission. When I'd mention it, she'd say, "I'm just making it more functional." You don't mind, do you? But I did mind. This was my home, mine. And then came February 1st, the day everything exploded. I came down early to make coffee and found Victoria in my kitchen with a man in a suit. Papers were spread across my table. "Good morning," I said, confused. "Victoria, who is this?" She looked guilty for just a moment before composing herself. "This is Mr. Patterson, a real estate agent. I asked him to value the house." My blood ran cold. "You did what?" "Just an informal valuation. For planning purposes." "Get out," I told Mr. Patterson. "Get out of my house right now." When he left, I turned to Victoria. "How dare you?" "This is my house, not yours. Not Marcus's, mine." "For now," she said, all pretense of friendliness gone. "But let's be realistic, Vivian. You won't live forever. This will belong to Marcus eventually, which means it belongs to our family. I'm just planning ahead for our daughter's future. Where is Marcus?" "He took Charlotte for a walk. He doesn't need to know about this." He gets too emotional. Too conflicted between loyalty to you and responsibility to his wife and child. "By going behind my back, this house will be ours," she said simply. "Sooner or later, wouldn't it be easier to downsize now? You're 89. You can't keep up with a property this size. It's dangerous for you to be alone. I want you out, today." She stood, smoothing her clothes. "Fine, but this conversation isn't over. Did you know in California, if someone is proven mentally incompetent, family can petition for conservatorship? All it takes is a few doctor's appointments, documentation of erratic behavior." My blood froze. "You're threatening me." "I'm informing you. You're old, Vivian. You forget things, get confused. That's normal at your age. But with the right documentation, witnesses, it could be seen as early dementia, mental decline. And then Marcus would have to step in to protect you, to manage your affairs, your living situation, your assets. Marcus would never do that." She smiled coldly. "Marcus will do what I tell him. He always does. He loves me. He loves Charlotte. When he has to choose between his elderly mother and his young family, who do you think he'll choose?" I couldn't speak, couldn't breathe. "Get out," I whispered, "before I call the police." "And tell them what? That your daughter-in-law is concerned about your welfare? They'll probably agree with me." She walked past me, deliberately bumping my shoulder. "We'll be gone this afternoon. But this isn't over. This house will be ours one way or another. The only question is whether you go willingly or we force the issue." I stood in my kitchen, shaking, tears streaming down my face, feeling more alone than I'd felt since Jonathan died. They left that afternoon. Marcus tried to apologize, but I couldn't even look at him. How could he not see what she was doing? For weeks I barely slept. Every phone ring sent panic through me. I started documenting everything. detailed calendars, never missing appointments, proving my competency. The paranoia was exhausting. I lost weight, lost sleep, lost my sense of security in my own home. Then 3 weeks ago, everything changed. I got a call from Jennifer Chen, a family law attorney in New York. Mrs. Ashford, I represent Victoria Ashford in a matter you should know about. Your daughter-in-law has filed for divorce. I nearly dropped the phone. What? She filed last week. Irreconcilable differences. She's requesting full custody, child support, spousal support, and a significant portion of Marcus's assets, including anticipated inheritance from you. She can't claim my assets in a divorce. Technically, no, but she can argue Marcus's future inheritance should be considered in calculating his net worth for support purposes. She's also claiming she sacrificed her career for Charlotte and deserves compensation. Why are you telling me this? Because Victoria doesn't know I'm calling. I'm withdrawing from the case. I can't represent someone whose primary motivation is financial gain. Victoria has made it clear her goal is extracting maximum money, including going after your assets through Marcus. She's even discussed contesting your will before you die, claiming you have a moral obligation to provide for Charlotte, and that she, as guardian, should control any trusts. My head spun. Does Marcus know? He was served yesterday. Victoria has his phone, monitoring his communications. Mrs. Ashford, you need to protect yourself and your assets. Victoria's dangerous. She's calculating, manipulative, and will use every tool, including your granddaughter, to get what she wants. After hanging up, I sat for hours staring at the ocean. My son's marriage was ending. My granddaughter was being used as a pawn. My daughter-in-law was scheming for my money before I was even dead. Marcus called that night sobbing. Victoria had left, taken Charlotte, served divorce papers all in one day. She demanded he move out, froze their accounts, said he'd never see Charlotte unless he met her financial demands. Mom, I'm so sorry. I should have listened. I should have seen what she was. But I loved her, wanted Charlotte to have both parents, wanted us to be a family. Come home, I told him. Come home to California. We'll figure this out together. He arrived 2 days later, looking like he'd aged 10 years in the weeks since I'd last seen him. My strong, successful son walked through the door of my home carrying a single suitcase, his eyes red from crying, his shoulders slumped with defeat. This wasn't the confident investment banker who'd left for New York decades ago. This was a broken man who'd finally seen the truth about the woman he'd married. We sat in the library, the same room where Victoria had made her threats just weeks before. The irony wasn't lost on me. I poured us each a glass of Jonathan's scotch, the good stuff. The bottle we'd been saving for a special occasion that never came before he died. If this wasn't the time to open it, I didn't know what was. Tell me everything, I said gently, from the beginning. And Marcus did. He talked for 3 hours straight, and with every word, I felt my anger toward Victoria grow and my heartbreak for my son deepen. He told me how Victoria had been pressuring him for over a year to get me to sell the house, how she'd wake him up in the middle of the night to discuss our financial future and what we're entitled to, how she'd made spreadsheets, actual spreadsheets, calculating my net worth, the value of the house, what they stood to inherit, and when. She'd even created timelines with different scenarios. If Vivian sells now, if Vivian develops dementia, if Vivian dies in the next 5 years. She talked about you like you were already dead. Mom, Marcus said, his voice breaking, like you were just an obstacle standing between her and the life she thought she deserved. And God help me, I tried to tell myself she was just being practical, just planning for our future. I wanted to believe she loved me for me, not for what my family had. He told me about the lawyer consultations Victoria had initiated without his knowledge, how she'd researched conservatorship laws, talked to attorneys about the process of having someone declared mentally incompetent. She'd even gone so far as to create a file on her computer labeled VA competency where she documented every time I forgot a small detail in conversation, every time I repeated a story, every little thing that could potentially be used as evidence of cognitive decline. She was building a case against you, Mom, for months, maybe even years, and I didn't see it. I didn't want to see it. The power of attorney suggestion hadn't been casual either. Victoria had actually drafted the documents, had them reviewed by a lawyer, and brought them home for Marcus to sign. She'd told him it was just in case something happened to me, that it was the responsible thing to do for an elderly parent. Marcus had refused to sign them without talking to me first. and Victoria had been furious. They'd had a massive fight about it, with Victoria accusing him of not trusting her, of choosing his mother over his wife, of being a mama's boy who couldn't make adult decisions. That's when I started to see her differently, Marcus admitted. The way she screamed at me that night, the things she said. She called you a selfish old woman who was hoarding wealth that should belong to the next generation. She said you'd already lived your life and it was time for you to step aside and let us have ours. And when I defended you, she said I was weak, that I'd never be a real man as long as I let my mother control me. My heart broke for him. How do you reconcile the person you married, the person you have a child with someone capable of such cruelty and manipulation? He told me about the memory care facility brochures Victoria had brought home. She'd toured 3 different facilities without telling him, collected pricing information, even gone so far as to put a deposit down on one just to hold the spot in case they needed it. She'd planned every detail of how she was going to institutionalize me and take control of my assets. The pregnancy, Marcus said, and fresh tears started flowing. Mom, I don't think it was an accident. I think she planned it. She went off birth control without telling me. I found the pill pack in the bathroom garbage, full for the month before she told me she was pregnant. She wanted to lock herself into this family permanently to give herself leverage. And Charlotte, his voice broke completely. My beautiful daughter is being used as a weapon. Victoria has already told me. I'll never see her again unless I give Victoria everything she wants in the divorce. I moved to sit beside him on the sofa, putting my arm around my grown son like I used to when he was a little boy with a scraped knee or a broken toy. But this wasn't something a Band-Aid or a new toy could fix. This required something bigger, something stronger, something that would protect us both and ensure that Charlotte didn't become a casualty of her mother's greed. We're going to fight this, I told him, all of it. But we need to be smart. We need to be strategic, and we need to do it right. The next morning, I called Richard Morrison, my attorney. Richard had been handling my legal affairs for over 30 years. He'd drafted Jonathan's will, managed our estate planning, handled the purchase and sale of properties over the years. He was sharp, experienced, and most importantly, he understood family dynamics and the complications that came with significant assets. Richard came to the house that afternoon. I laid out everything for him, Victoria's threats, her plans to have me declared incompetent, her scheming to access my assets, the divorce filing, her attempts to use Charlotte as leverage. I showed him the timeline Marcus had helped me create, documenting every conversation, every threat, every manipulation. Richard listened carefully, taking notes on his yellow legal pad in the methodical way he always did. When I finished, he sat back in his chair and was quiet for a long moment. Vivian, he finally said, I'm going to be very direct with you. What Victoria is attempting is elder abuse. Financial elder abuse, specifically. She's trying to exploit your age and your relationship with your son to gain access to your assets. The conservatorship threats are particularly serious. While she couldn't actually have you declared incompetent without clear medical evidence, the process itself is invasive, expensive, and emotionally traumatic. And even if she ultimately failed, she could drag you through hell trying. So what do? Marcus asked. We go on offense, Richard said firmly. The best defense is a good offense. And right now, you're in a position of strength. Vivienne is clearly competent, has full control of her faculties, and has the right to manage her own affairs however she sees fit. We need to make sure Victoria can never challenge that. Here's what I recommend. He laid out a comprehensive plan. First, we'd get a complete medical evaluation from independent specialists, a neurologist and a psychiatrist, documenting my cognitive function, mental health, and competency. Not just a simple exam, but comprehensive neuropsychological testing that would provide ironclad evidence of my mental acuity. We'll have you take the mini mental state examination, the Montreal Cognitive Assessment, possibly even a full neuropsychological battery if needed, Richard explained. We want documentation so thorough that no court would ever question your competency, and we'll have it done by doctors with impeccable credentials who have no financial interest in the outcome. Second, we'd restructure my entire estate using an irrevocable trust. I'd transfer the title of the house and the bulk of my other assets into the Ashford Family Trust, with me as the initial trustee and Richard as the successor trustee. The trust documents would explicitly state that Victoria was not a beneficiary and had no claim to any trust assets, It would also include a no contest clause. If anyone challenged the trust, they'd forfeit anything they might have otherwise inherited. The beauty of an irrevocable trust, Richard explained, is that once assets are transferred into it, they're no longer considered your personal property. They belong to the trust, which means Victoria can't claim them in the divorce. And if she tries to have you declared incompetent, it won't give her access to the trust assets. The trust continues regardless of your mental state, with a successor trustee stepping in if needed. Third, we'd establish a separate trust for Charlotte, a substantial trust that would ensure my granddaughters financial security for life, college, graduate school, a home someday, whatever she needed. But the trust would be structured so that Victoria had no access to it and no control over it. Marcus and I would be co-trustees, and the trust documents would specify that the funds could only be used for Charlotte's direct benefit, not for Victoria's expenses or lifestyle. This way, Richard said, you're providing for your granddaughter without giving Victoria access to the money. It also undermines any argument Victoria might make that you're not concerned about Charlotte's welfare. You are. You're just making sure her mother can't exploit that concern. Fourth, we'd update my will to be crystal clear about my intentions. Victoria would be explicitly excluded from any inheritance, with language stating that this exclusion was intentional and not an oversight. The no contest clause would be reinforced, and we'd include a letter of wishes, not legally binding, but persuasive in court, explaining my reasoning and my concerns about Victoria's behavior. Finally, Richard said, we need to consider the possibility that Victoria might try something dramatic. She might show up at your home claiming she has a right to be here. She might try to manipulate Marcus into giving her access. She might even try to claim that you invited her to stay and then had a mental episode and forgot. So we're going to document everything. Install security cameras if you don't already have them, and make sure there's a clear paper trail of your intentions. The plan was comprehensive, aggressive, and exactly what we needed, but it would take time and money. How much time, I asked. 3 weeks minimum to get everything properly drafted, filed, and executed. The medical evaluations can start immediately. The trust documents will take me about a week to draft. Then we'll need to review them together, make any necessary changes, get them notarized and filed with the county. The will update is simpler, maybe a few days. But we need to do this right, Vivian. Rushing creates mistakes, and mistakes create vulnerabilities. And the cost? Richard named a figure that made Marcus wince, but I didn't hesitate. Do it, all of it, whatever it costs. Because here's the thing about money when you're 89 years old and you've worked your whole life to build something. It's not really about the money anymore. It's about autonomy. It's about dignity. It's about making sure that the life you built, the choices you made, the legacy you want to leave, that all of it is protected from people who see you as nothing more than a bank account with an expiration date. We started immediately. The next day, I had appointments with Dr. Sarah Chen, a neurologist at Cedars-Sinai, and Dr. Robert Martinez, a psychiatrist who specialized in geriatric mental health. Both came highly recommended by Richard and had no prior relationship with me or my family. Dr. Chen put me through 3 hours of testing, memory tests where I had to recall lists of words and sequences of numbers, problem-solving tasks where I had to figure out patterns and complete puzzles, questions about current events, about my personal history, about basic facts. She tested my reflexes, my coordination, my sensory perception. She did an MRI to look for any signs of stroke, dementia, or other neurological issues. When the results came back a week later, Dr. Chen called me personally. Mrs. Ashford, I have to say, your results are remarkable. Your cognitive function is well above average for your age. Your memory, both short-term and long-term, is excellent. Your problem-solving skills are sharp. The MRI shows some age-appropriate changes, but nothing concerning. Frankly, I've tested people in their 60s who don't perform as well as you did. You're in excellent neurological health. Dr. Martinez's evaluation was similar. We talked for 2 hours about my life, my emotions, my mental state. He asked about grief, how I was coping with Jonathan's death. He asked about anxiety, depression, any changes in mood or behavior. He gave me standardized tests for depression, anxiety, and other mental health conditions. His report was equally positive. Mrs. Ashford demonstrates no signs of depression, anxiety, or any other mental health condition that would impair her judgment or decision-making capacity. She shows appropriate grief over her husband's death, but has adapted well. Her affect is appropriate, her thought processes are logical and organized, and her judgment is sound. She is fully capable of managing her own affairs and making informed decisions about her care and her assets. With those evaluations in hand, Richard drafted the trust documents. I spent hours at his office going over every detail, every clause, every provision. We structured it carefully: the house, my investment accounts, my retirement funds. Everything except a small checking account for daily expenses went into the trust. The trust would provide me with income for the rest of my life, and upon my death, everything would pass to Marcus, except for Charlotte's separate trust, which would continue for her benefit. The trust documents explicitly stated that Victoria Simmons Ashford was not a beneficiary and had no claim to any trust assets. The no contest clause was ironclad. Anyone who challenged the trust in any way would forfeit all benefits and receive nothing. We set up Charlotte's trust with $2 million, enough to pay for the best: education, a home someday, financial security for life if managed properly. The trust specified that funds could only be used for Charlotte's health, education, maintenance, and support. Victoria had no access, no control, no say in how the money was managed or spent. Marcus and I were co-trustees until Charlotte turned 25, at which point she'd take control herself. The will was updated to match the trust provisions. Simple, clear, unambiguous. Everything in the trust passes according to the trust terms. My personal effects, jewelry, clothing, photographs, a few items not in the trust, would go to Marcus. Victoria got nothing, and the will explicitly stated this was intentional. 3 weeks after that terrible conversation in my kitchen, we were ready. Richard filed the trust documents with the county. We had copies of all my medical evaluations. My will was properly executed with witnesses. Everything was documented, organized, bulletproof. And then we waited. We didn't have to wait long. 10 days ago, Victoria made her move. Her desperate final gambit to get what she wanted. It was a Tuesday morning. I was in the garden, doing what I love, pruning my roses, deadheading the spent blooms, checking for aphids and disease. It was therapeutic being in the garden. My hands in the soil, the scent of roses in the air, the morning sun warm on my shoulders. For those moments, I could forget about Victoria, about the divorce, about all the ugliness. I could just be present with my flowers, with the life I'd built in this beautiful place. I heard a car in the driveway. We weren't expecting anyone. Marcus had gone for a run on the beach. I straightened up, my knees protesting a bit. 89-year-old knees, don't love kneeling in garden beds, and made my way around to the front of the house, and there she was, Victoria, getting out of a rental car with Charlotte in her arms and what looked like 3 large suitcases in the trunk. My first instinct was panic. What was she doing here? But I forced myself to stay calm, to think clearly. This was a test. This was the moment we'd prepared for. "Vivian," Victoria called out, her voice bright and cheerful, like nothing had happened between us, like she hadn't threatened me, hadn't tried to have me declared incompetent, wasn't currently trying to destroy my son in divorce court. Surprise! I thought Charlotte and I would come visit Grandma. Marcus mentioned you two had patched things up, and I thought, why should our personal issues stop Charlotte from seeing her grandmother? She was already walking toward me, Charlotte on her hip, that practiced smile on her face that I now recognized as completely fake. Everything about her was calculated, the casual designer athleisure wear that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent, the perfectly styled hair, the minimal makeup that made her look fresh and natural. She'd prepared for this encounter as carefully as I had. "Victoria," I said carefully, keeping my voice neutral, "this isn't a good time." "Oh, don't be silly." She breezed right past me, through my open front door. I'd left it open when I went to the garden, and into my house like she had every right to be there. We're family. Family doesn't need scheduled visits. Besides, I thought you'd be happy to see your granddaughter. It's been weeks since you've seen Charlotte. Haven't you missed her? Of course I'd missed her. I'd missed her desperately, but I knew a trap when I saw one, and this was absolutely a trap. I followed Victoria inside, my mind racing. She went straight to the guest room she'd stayed in before, the one with the view of the rose garden. She put Charlotte down in the portable crib I kept for visits. Seeing that crib, I felt a pang in my chest. I'd bought it with such hope, such excitement about having my granddaughter stay with me. Now it felt like evidence of my vulnerability, my soft spots that Victoria could exploit. Victoria started unpacking her suitcases, hanging clothes in the closet, setting up baby supplies on the dresser. acting for all the world like she was settling in for an extended stay. "Victoria," I said from the doorway, trying to keep my voice firm. "You can't just move in here." She turned to face me, and the false cheer disappeared from her face like someone had flipped a switch. This was the real Victoria, the one I'd seen that day in my kitchen. Cold, calculating, dangerous. "I'm not moving in," she said, her voice pleasant but with an edge underneath. "I'm just visiting. A nice long visit. Maybe a few months, just until the divorce is finalized and I can afford a place of my own. New York is so expensive, Vivian, and with all the legal fees, I just can't manage my own apartment right now. But this house has so much room. 12 bedrooms. Surely you can spare one for your son's wife and your granddaughter." "Ex-wife," I corrected. "You filed for divorce. And no, you cannot stay here." She tilted her head, studying me like I was a particularly interesting specimen under a microscope. "Here's how this is going to work, Vivian. I'm staying here, and you're going to let me. Because if you don't, if you try to kick me out, I'm going to call the police and tell them that you're an elderly woman having a mental health crisis. I'll tell them you invited us to stay and then forgot, that you're confused and disoriented, that you're a danger to yourself and to my daughter." This was exactly what Richard had warned me about, the exact scenario we'd prepared for. "I'll tell them you've been declining for months," Victoria continued, warming to her theme. "I'll tell them you repeat yourself, forget conversations, get confused about dates and times. I'll tell them I'm terrified for your safety and for Charlotte's safety. I'll have you evaluated, and I guarantee I can find doctors who will say you're not competent to live alone." She stepped closer to me, her voice dropping to barely above a whisper. "And then Marcus will have to step in. Even though you've turned him against me, he'll have to do what's right for your safety. And what's right is getting you into a facility where you can be properly cared for. And while you're safely tucked away in memory care, I'll live in this house with Charlotte, maintaining the property, making sure it's properly managed until it can be transferred to its rightful owners, Marcus and, by extension, our daughter." I looked at her, really looked at her, and saw clearly, perhaps for the first time, exactly what she was. Not just greedy, not just manipulative, but genuinely dangerous. A woman who would destroy anyone who stood between her and what she wanted. A woman who would use her own daughter as a weapon. A woman who had no empathy, no conscience, no limits to what she'd do. And I made a choice, not the choice she expected. "You seem to have thought this through very carefully," I said quietly. She smiled, triumphant. "I have, very thoroughly. So what's it going to be, Vivian? Do I stay, or do we call the police and start the competency proceedings?" I looked past her to where Charlotte was sleeping peacefully in her crib, completely unaware that her mother was a monster. And I thought about everything Richard and I had prepared for, every contingency we'd planned for, every trap we'd set for exactly this moment. "Fine," I said. "You can stay, for now." Victoria's smile widened. "I knew you'd see reason." I walked out of the room and immediately pulled out my phone. I sent a single text to Richard Morrison. "She's here. Enact the plan." His response came within seconds. "On my way. Don't engage further." I went to my bedroom and locked the door. Then I called Marcus, who was just finishing his run. "Victoria's here," I said when he answered, out of breath. "What? What do you mean she's here?" "She showed up with Charlotte and 3 suitcases. She's in the guest room unpacking. She says she's staying for a few months." "Marcus," she threatened me again. The exact same threats as before. Call the police, have me evaluated, claim I invited her and forgot, get me institutionalized. I heard him start running. "I'm 5 minutes away. Don't let her see you're upset. Act normal. Richard? Already on his way. Good. Mom, this is it. This is what we prepared for. Just hold on for a few more minutes." I stayed in my bedroom, listening to Victoria move around the house. I heard her in the kitchen, opening cabinets, the refrigerator, making herself at home. I heard her talking on the phone to someone, though I couldn't make out the words. I heard Charlotte start to fuss and Victoria soothing her. 20 minutes later, I heard the doorbell ring. Then voices in the foyer, Richard's calm professional tone, a deeper voice I didn't recognize. I took a deep breath, checked my reflection in the mirror to make sure I looked composed, and went downstairs. Richard was standing in my foyer with a sheriff's deputy and a legal document in his hand. Marcus had arrived and was standing to the side, his expression carefully neutral. Victoria was in the kitchen doorway, Charlotte on her hip, her face pale. "Good morning, Mrs. Ashford," Richard said formally, as we'd rehearsed. As your attorney and the successor trustee of the Ashford Family Trust, I'm here to inform Ms. Victoria Simmons Ashford that she is trespassing on trust property and must vacate the premises immediately. The sheriff's deputy stepped forward, his hand resting casually on his belt. Ma'am, he addressed Victoria, you've been served with a notice of trespass. You need to gather your belongings and leave the property immediately. Victoria's face went from pale to red, shock giving way to fury. You can't do this. She looked at me, her eyes blazing. This is your house, Vivian. Tell them they're wrong. It's not my house, I said calmly, and I was proud of how steady my voice was. It hasn't been for 3 weeks. The house belongs to the Ashford Family Trust. I transferred the title on January 20th. And as the current trustee of that trust, I have the authority to determine who may and may not reside on trust property. And I've determined that you may not. I watched her face as the implications sank in. All her planning, all her scheming, all her threats, they'd been based on the assumption that this was my personal property, that she could manipulate me into letting her stay or force the issue through conservatorship proceedings. But you can't force a trustee to allow someone onto trust property. And even if she somehow managed to have me declared incompetent, Richard would become trustee, and his instructions were crystal clear. Victoria was never, under any circumstances, to be allowed on this property. But Charlotte, she started, her voice rising with desperation. Charlotte is always welcome here, I said firmly. When Marcus brings her to visit, she will be welcomed with open arms. You, however, are not welcome in this house. Not now, not ever. This is illegal, Victoria spat. You can't keep me from my daughter. I'm not keeping you from your daughter, I said, and I let a little bit of steel show in my voice now. I'm keeping you from my house. There's a significant difference. This is Marcus's inheritance, she was nearly shouting now. I have rights. As his wife. You're not his wife, Richard interrupted calmly. You filed for divorce, remember? And regardless, adult children of the grantor have no legal right to occupy trust property without the trustee's permission. You have no claim here, legal or otherwise. The sheriff's deputy was getting impatient. Ma'am, you need to leave now, or I'll have to escort you out and you'll be arrested for trespassing. Victoria looked around wildly, like she was searching for an escape, a loophole, something she could use to salvage the situation. Her eyes landed on Marcus. Marcus, she said, her voice suddenly soft, pleading. Please, we're a family. We have a daughter together. Don't let them do this to me. Don't let your mother turn you against me. Marcus looked at her for a long moment. I could see the war on his face. The man who'd loved her, who'd married her, who'd had a child with her, fighting against the man who'd finally seen the truth about what she was. You did this to yourself, Victoria, he said quietly. Not my mother, you. Every threat, every manipulation, every lie. Those were your choices. And now you get to live with the consequences. Victoria's face twisted with rage. She took a step toward me, and the sheriff's deputy immediately moved between us. You'll regret this, she hissed at me. I will take everything from you. I'll make sure you never see Charlotte again. I'll destroy Marcus in court. I'll ruin you both. You have no idea what I'm capable of. Actually, Richard said, pulling another document from his briefcase, I think we have a pretty good idea, which is why I'm also serving you with this restraining order. You are to have no contact with Mrs. Ashford except through attorneys. You are to stay at least 100 yards away from this property. Any violation will result in your immediate arrest. The deputy took the restraining order and handed it to Victoria. Ma'am, I need you to leave now. You can collect your belongings, but you need to do it quickly. For a moment, I thought Victoria was going to refuse, was going to force them to physically remove her. But she must have seen something in the deputy's expression that convinced her she'd lost this battle. She turned on her heel, stormed into the guest room, and emerged 5 minutes later with Charlotte and one suitcase. The rest of her things she left behind. At the door, she turned back to me one last time. Her face was a mask of pure hatred. Enjoy your empty house, Vivian, she said, her voice dripping with venom. Enjoy rattling around in all these rooms alone, with no family, no grandchildren, nothing but your precious memories and your stubborn pride. You'll die alone in this house, and no one will even know until the smell alerts the neighbors. I hope it was worth it. At least I'll die in my own home, I said quietly, on my own terms, with my dignity intact. Can you say the same? She left, the door slamming behind her so hard the chandelier in the foyer shook. Through the window, I watched her screech out of the driveway in her rental car, and I felt relief. Pure, overwhelming relief. Richard put a hand on my shoulder. "Are you all right?" "I'm perfect," I said, and I meant it. The legal aftermath was swift and brutal. Victoria's divorce attorney was a shark named Bradley Peterson, who specialized in high net worth divorces. He was expensive, aggressive, and had a reputation for getting his clients massive settlements. He filed motions demanding full custody of Charlotte, spousal support of $30,000 a month, child support of $15,000 a month, half of all marital assets, and, this was the bold part, a share of Marcus's anticipated inheritance from me. Marcus's attorney, a brilliant woman named Catherine Liu, who'd handled some of the biggest divorces in New York, filed a response that was devastating. She included evidence of Victoria's schemes, emails, text messages, the file Victoria had kept on her computer documenting my supposed mental decline. Victoria had been sloppy, had kept records of her manipulations like some kind of trophy collection. There were emails to friends where she bragged about playing the long game with Marcus's family wealth. There were texts about her plans to have me declared incompetent. There was even a voice memo where she'd recorded herself practicing what she'd say to doctors to convince them I was unfit to live independently. Catherine also subpoenaed Victoria's financial records and discovered some interesting things. Victoria had credit card debt of over $200,000, designer clothes, expensive trips, luxury items she'd been buying and hiding from Marcus. She'd taken out a personal loan for $50,000 using Marcus's salary information without his knowledge. She'd been living well beyond even their considerable means, and she'd been planning to use my money to bail herself out. The judge was not impressed. At the preliminary hearing, Judge Sandra Morrison reviewed all the evidence and made some initial rulings that set the tone for everything that followed. "Ms. Simmons Ashford," the judge said, her voice cold, "I've reviewed the evidence presented by Mr. Ashford's attorney, and I have to say, I find your behavior deeply concerning. The evidence suggests a pattern of financial manipulation, elder abuse, and using your daughter as leverage to extract money from your husband and his family. This court takes such behavior very seriously." She denied Victoria's request for full custody. Instead, she granted Marcus and Victoria joint legal custody, with Marcus having primary physical custody. Charlotte would live with Marcus in California, and Victoria would get supervised visitation every other weekend until she completed a court-ordered psychiatric evaluation and parenting classes. The supervised visitation part made Victoria's attorney object loudly. "Your Honor, there's no evidence that my client is a danger to her child. There's evidence that your client is a danger to herself and others through her documented willingness to lie, manipulate, and exploit vulnerable individuals, including her own family members," Judge Morrison responded, "until I'm satisfied that Ms. Simmons Ashford can put her daughter's needs above her own financial interests. Visitation will be supervised." Motion denied. Victoria's request for $30,000 a month in spousal support was reduced to $5,000 a month for 2 years, enough to help her get on her feet, but nowhere near the lifestyle she'd been demanding. Child support was set at $3,000 a month, a reasonable amount given Marcus's income, but, again, far less than Victoria had demanded. The request for a share of Marcus's anticipated inheritance was thrown out entirely. "Ms. Simmons Ashford," the judge said, "you cannot claim an interest in property that Mr. Ashford doesn't own and may never own. His mother's estate is hers to dispose of as she sees fit. She could leave everything to charity, to a trust for stray cats, to anyone she chooses. You have no claim to it whatsoever, and frankly, the fact that your attorney filed this motion suggests either incompetence or a troubling willingness to pursue frivolous claims." Victoria's attorney, Bradley Peterson, looked like he wanted to sink through the floor. The division of marital assets was more favorable to Marcus than anyone had expected. Because Victoria had hidden debt and taken out loans using Marcus's information without his consent, the judge ruled that she'd have to assume that debt herself. The Manhattan apartment, which was in both their names, would be sold and the proceeds split evenly. Marcus's 401k and investment accounts, which he'd built up largely before the marriage, were mostly protected. Victoria would get some of the marital assets, but nothing close to the 50% she'd demanded. And then came the final blow. Catherine Liu presented evidence that Victoria had violated the restraining order by calling the house 3 times and sending letters to me through the mail. Each violation carried potential criminal charges. Ms. Simmons Ashford, Judge Morrison said, you are very close to facing contempt charges, which could result in jail time. I suggest you take the restraining order seriously and cease all contact with Mrs. Ashford immediately. The divorce was finalized 2 months ago. Victoria walked away with far less than she'd hoped for: some money, supervised visitation with her daughter, and a reputation in New York legal circles as a cautionary tale of what happens when greed overwhelms common sense. I heard through Marcus that she moved back to Ohio, to some small town where her family lives. She lives with her parents now, working as a waitress at a local restaurant, seeing Charlotte every other weekend when Marcus flies her out or makes the drive. The supervised visitation requirement was lifted after she completed the psychiatric evaluation and parenting classes. But the damage to her relationship with Charlotte has been done. Charlotte doesn't remember living with her mother. She calls Marcus Dada, and she started calling me Mimi, which makes my heart swell every single time. Marcus and Charlotte moved in with me 3 months ago. They took the east wing of the house, a suite of rooms that includes the nursery I'd prepared, 2 additional bedrooms, a private sitting room, and their own bathroom. It's perfect. We have our own spaces, but we're together, a real family. The house feels alive again. Every morning, I wake up to the sound of Charlotte babbling in her crib and Marcus singing to her as he gets her ready for the day. We have breakfast together in the kitchen. Marcus makes surprisingly good pancakes for someone who used to live on takeout. Charlotte sits in her high chair, smearing fruit all over her face and laughing when I make funny faces at her. Marcus has been working remotely, taking video calls from the library while Charlotte naps. He's been good at it, better than he thought he'd be. And he's healing. I can see it happening slowly, day by day. The guilt and shame of being manipulated is fading, replaced by a quiet confidence, a clearer sense of himself and what he wants. He started therapy, which I encouraged. Twice a week, he drives into Santa Barbara to see a therapist who specializes in helping people recover from manipulative relationships. He comes home from those sessions emotionally drained sometimes, but also lighter, like he's setting down weights he's been carrying for too long. And he's started dating again. Nothing serious yet. Just coffee dates and dinners with women he meets through friends or online. He's cautious now, wary in a way he never was before. But he's also more discerning, quicker to spot red flags, less willing to overlook concerning behavior just because he wants to believe the best in people. Last week, he brought someone to dinner. Her name is Amy. She's a teacher at a local elementary school, and she showed up in jeans and a sweater with her hair in a ponytail and no makeup. She brought flowers from her own garden instead of an expensive bouquet from a florist. She asked if she could help cook dinner, and when I said yes, she rolled up her sleeves and chopped vegetables while asking me about my career, my life, my roses. She played with Charlotte, getting down on the floor with her, not caring that she got spit up on her sweater. She didn't ask about the house's value or our financial situation. She didn't position herself carefully for photos or check her phone constantly. She just was herself. Real, genuine, warm. After she left, Marcus asked what I thought. I like her, I said. She seems real. He smiled, the first truly happy smile I'd seen on his face in months. Yeah, she does, doesn't she? The house has become what Jonathan and I always dreamed it would be. A home filled with family and love and laughter. Charlotte has her first birthday next week, and we're throwing a party in the gardens. Just small, intimate. A few of Marcus's friends, some of my friends, Amy and her parents, a birthday cake, some decorations, an afternoon of celebrating this beautiful child who has brought so much joy into our lives. I've started updating the house, not because Victoria was right about it being outdated, but because I want to. New curtains in the living room, lighter, breezier, letting in more light. Fresh paint in the dining room, a warm cream instead of the darker color we'd had for 20 years. I had the kitchen backsplash redone with new tile, brighter and more modern. Not erasing Jonathan, his presence is still everywhere in the wine cellar he built, in the library where his favorite books still sit on the shelves, in the garden paths we walked together for 40 years. But allowing the house to evolve, to grow, to be a home for this next generation. I'm teaching Charlotte to love the garden. She's only 1, so mostly that means I carry her around while I work, narrating what I'm doing. This is a rose, Charlotte. Smell it, gently. These are herbs, rosemary, basil, thyme. This is where Mimi grows tomatoes. She probably doesn't understand a word, but someday she will. Someday she'll remember these moments, these mornings in the garden with her grandmother. I'm 89 years old. I don't know how much time I have left. Could be 1 year, could be 5, could be 10. My mother lived to 96, sharp as a tack until the day she died. Maybe I have those genes. Maybe I don't. But whatever time I have, I'm going to spend it like this in my home, surrounded by people I love, watching my granddaughter grow, supporting my son as he builds a new life. And when I do die, when my time finally comes, it will be here. In this house that Jonathan and I built together, in the bedroom where we spent 49 years of marriage, looking out at the ocean and the roses and the magnolia tree. It will be on my terms, with my dignity intact, surrounded by love instead of resentment, peace instead of conflict. Victoria tried to take that from me. She tried to take my home, my autonomy, my final years of independence. She saw me as nothing more than an obstacle between her and money, an old woman who should just step aside and let the next generation take what they wanted. But she underestimated me. She saw my age and assumed I was weak, vulnerable, easy to manipulate. She didn't know about the decades I spent fighting to be taken seriously in a male-dominated field, the battles I won through sheer determination and refusal to back down. She didn't know that I'd saved children's lives by staying calm under pressure and making hard decisions. She didn't know that I'd survived 3 miscarriages and kept trying for a baby because I didn't know how to quit. She didn't know that I'd built a marriage and a career and a life through hard work and sacrifice and absolute refusal to let anyone tell me what I couldn't do. She saw an 89-year-old woman. I showed her a fighter. The deed spoke, all right. It said this house belongs to the Ashford family trust. It said I had the right to determine who could stay and who had to go. It said that no amount of manipulation, threats, or schemes could override clearly documented legal decisions made by a competent adult. It said that age doesn't equal weakness, and being someone's mother or grandmother doesn't mean they get to walk all over you. But more than that, the deed spoke about choices and consequences. Victoria chose greed over family. She chose manipulation over honesty. She chose to see people as resources to be exploited, rather than human beings to be loved. And those choices had consequences. She lost her marriage, her daughter, her claim to wealth she'd never actually earned. She lost the respect of everyone who knew what she'd done. She lost the life she thought she was entitled to. And me? I chose to fight. I chose to protect what was mine and what mattered most. I chose to stand up for myself when everyone expected me to just give in. And my choices had consequences too, good consequences. I kept my home. I kept my dignity. I have my son and my granddaughter living with me, filling this house with the love and laughter it was always meant to hold. I'm not going to lie and say it was easy. The stress of those months, the constant worry about what Victoria might do next, the fear that I could lose everything I'd worked for, it took a toll. I lost weight. I didn't sleep well. There were nights when I'd lie awake staring at the ceiling, playing out worst-case scenarios in my head. But I'd do it all again in a heartbeat. Because some things are worth fighting for. Your home is worth fighting for. Your independence is worth fighting for. Your right to make your own choices about your own life, that's worth fighting for with everything you have. And if you're sitting there watching this thinking, I could never do that. I could never stand up to my family like that. Let me tell you something. Yes, you can. You're stronger than you think you are. You've survived every difficult day of your life so far, haven't you? You've made it through heartbreaks and disappointments and challenges you didn't think you could handle. You have reserves of strength you don't even know about yet. Don't let anyone, family or otherwise, make you feel like you don't have the right to protect what's yours. Don't let anyone guilt you into giving up your independence, your home, your autonomy, because it's more convenient for them. Don't let anyone convince you that being old means being powerless. I'm 89 years old, and I just fought off a woman 40 years younger than me who thought she could outsmart me. I didn't do it with physical strength, God knows. She could probably outrun me any day of the week. I did it with knowledge, preparation, and the help of good professionals. I did it by refusing to be a victim, by refusing to accept that I should just roll over and let her have what she wanted. You can do it too. Whatever battle you're facing, whatever challenge seems insurmountable, you can do it. Get help, lawyers, doctors, therapists, whoever you need. Document everything. Know your rights. Make decisions while you're healthy and competent, so no one can question them later. And most importantly, don't be afraid to stand up for yourself. Now, I want to hear from you. Where are you from? What city are you calling home? I'm here in Montecito, California, in my beautiful home that I fought to keep. But I want to know where you all are watching from, all across the country and maybe even around the world. And if you love your grandma, if you have a grandmother who taught you to stand up for yourself, who showed you what strength looks like, who refused to be pushed aside or forgotten, I want you to comment your city below. Let's see how many of us there are. Let's create a community of people who understand that age is just a number, that being elderly doesn't mean being helpless, that our grandmothers and great-grandmothers are warriors who deserve our respect and protection. And if this story resonated with you, if it made you think about your own family dynamics, your own boundaries, your own fights, then please do me a favor, hit that like button. Subscribe to this channel so you don't miss future stories. And share this video with your friends, especially anyone who might be dealing with similar family issues. Anyone who needs to hear that it's okay to stand up for yourself. Anyone who needs to be reminded that they're stronger than they think. Because stories like this need to be told. Stories of women, and men too, who refuse to be victims, who refuse to give up what's theirs without a fight, who refuse to go quietly into the night, just because someone else decided it's more convenient that way. I'm Vivian Catherine Ashford. I'm 89 years old. I'm a retired pediatric cardiologist. I'm a widow, a mother, a grandmother. I live in an $8 million house in Montecito, California that I fought to keep. And I'm still here, still standing, still refusing to let anyone tell me what I can and can't do with my own life. This is my story. The story of how my daughter-in-law tried to block me from my own mansion, and how I let the deed and the law and my own determination speak for itself. It's not the ending I would have chosen when this all started. I would have preferred to have a daughter-in-law I could love and trust, a united family, a relationship with Victoria where we supported each other instead of fighting. But life doesn't always give us the endings we want. Sometimes we have to fight for the endings we need. And this is the ending I needed. My home is mine. My granddaughter is safe and loved. My son is free from a toxic marriage and building a new, healthier life. And me, I'm still the mistress of my own domain, still making my own choices, still living life on my own terms. Thank you for listening to my story. Thank you for being here, for taking the time to hear about an old woman's fight to keep what's hers. It means more than you know. Remember, you're never too old to stand up for yourself. You're never too old to fight for what's right. You're never too old to say no to people who want to take advantage of you. Your home is your castle, your life is your own, and no one, absolutely no one, has the right to take that away from you. God bless you all. Comment your city, tell me about your own grandmas. Let me know if this story touched you in any way. I'll see you in the next story. Until then, keep fighting. Keep standing up for yourselves. Keep refusing to be pushed around. And keep loving fiercely, living fully, and never, ever letting anyone convince you that you're too old to matter. This is Vivian Catherine Ashford signing off. Take care of yourselves and take care of each other.